This is the Physical Activity Researcher Podcast, a podcast for researchers of sedentary behavior, physical activity, and sports. Join for a relaxed dialogue about research design, practicalities, and, well, anything related to research. Learn from your fellow researchers useful and relevant information that does not fit into formal content and limited space of scientific publications. And here is your host, researcher and entrepreneur, Olli Tikkanen.
Welcome everyone. We have a great guest for this episode. She's working as a lecturer in workplace health and well-being in the Department of Health Research at Lancaster University. Earlier she has been in postdoctorate role at Swansea University. She is an interdisciplinary mixed method researcher and her research expertise is in workplace physical activity and sedentary behavior intervention, development and evaluation. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our guest, Abigail Morris. Welcome, Abigail.
Hi, Olli. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you in the show. Makes sense. So if we move to your current project, could you tell us more about what kind of things you are working at the moment?
Yeah, sure. So following my PhD research, I went to Swansea University. So this was working on an EPSRC funded project looking at the role of technology for helping to prompt and remind people, office workers, to break up their sitting time throughout the day. So this was a project in collaboration with Melita McNary and Kelly McIntosh, working with colleagues from the Baker Institute over in Australia, so David Dunstan, Neville Owen and Paddy Dempsey. And this, so using a mobile phone app and really then looking at whether that was acceptable and feasible among a group of office workers, and then try to explore the contextual factors around what was influencing workers' adherence to the break times as well.
So could you tell how did this mobile phone app work? How often did it remind and so on?
Yeah, sure. So, within the literature, there's some evidence that prolonged sitting has a detrimental impact on our health and well-being. So the app had a capability to prompt either every 30 minutes or every 60 minutes. And you could make changes, but we decided on those two times, 30 minutes and 60 minutes. So we had two intervention groups, one that would receive a 30-minute prompt, the second group would receive a 60-minute prompt, and the third group was a non-intervention control, essentially. So it just popped up with a message at the targeted frequency of break, and it just reminded as a little kind of notification on the phone to say time to stand up. And then one of the limitations of the app was it required manual entry to say, yes, I've stood up, or no, I haven't stood up, or whether they needed to postpone it or not. So it wasn't able to detect automatically whether the participant was already standing or had stood up on the notification. But that's how it worked, and it was a 12-week intervention.
And how did people find this, and was it effective changing their behavior?
So overall, participants were very receptive, and they found that the prompts were useful and a useful reminder. The frequency of the prompts, however, differed. So people in the 60-minute group said that even that felt like it came around really quickly. So when you're really engrossed in a task at work, and if you're trying to finish a project or something, 60 minutes can go really, really quickly. But that prompt to break up the sitting time was really useful. Whereas the 30-minute prompt group said that the frequency was even more almost intrusive sometimes, but it could be a bit disruptive to their workflow and not necessarily feasible to achieve throughout the working day. So what we did see, so we're working on getting this published at the moment, so I'll give you some kind of higher level insights onto the results, but we saw no changes to sitting time in the control group or the 30-minute group. but we saw a reduction in sitting time in the 60-minute group. So this is a reduction in the total sitting time. But then we also saw that there was a change to the pattern in which sitting was accumulated throughout the working day. So for the 30-minute group and the 60-minute group, they actually reduced the amount of time they spent in prolonged sitting bouts. So that was really interesting as well. So the 30-minute group didn't reduce the total time overall, but they actually broke up their sitting time more frequently throughout the day, which has shown to be more beneficial than just taking one longer break throughout the day.
So basically 30-minute group found it a little bit intrusive, and it was maybe affecting their workflow in the negative way, and also 60-minute group was saying a little bit, but basically both of the reminders were effective, reducing total sedentary time, and the 60-minute was reducing the total sedentary time, and both were reducing prolonged one. So how do you see it, like, from the negatives and positives? Is it good to use this kind of technology, and how should be the frequency?
I think there are positives and negatives, as you just said. I suppose using a standardized frequency isn't always appropriate for individuals and their working patterns, because they can be so varied within different industries and different settings. So there is a call to develop more, I suppose, complex technologies, maybe with sort of capabilities to learn about individuals' patterns and behaviours throughout the day, to tailor intervention strategies and prompts to the individual. But the app capability for this one wasn't that advanced, so we did stick to that standardized break frequency. It seems to be more feasible to break up sitting time and to give those hourly prompts within practice. So that's within a workplace setting, although some of the kind of lab-based trials have shown that actually every 30 minutes is more beneficial for different cardio-metabolic markers. So there is a way up between the two, but I think if you're thinking practically and trying to integrate it into sustainably into working practice, it has to fit in with what people can achieve and what people can feel that they can implement into their working day. So potentially hourly is more feasible, although I think future technologies could potentially try to tailor strategies.
And do you think it could work in a way that you, for example, use the technology in the beginning to learn new habits, and then you can leave out the technology because you have learned actually habits to break up sitting often enough?
That's a good question. Yeah, and habit development can be so varied for individuals, and for some they may pick up the habit very quickly, and for others it may take a lot longer to embed into their routines. It's difficult to say. Often over time, and when you look at follow-up data, you see a drop-off and a decline once an intervention has stopped. And from the qualitative reports from this study, the majority of participants had stopped using the app once the intervention had finished. So they kind of perceived it as, I'm taking part in this intervention for 12 weeks, that's the duration at start and finish, rather than I'm adopting this as a longer term behaviour change strategy. So there's kind of differences in the intervention message, and maybe that's something we need to consider in future trials, rather than it being a defined ending date. I only have to put up with this app for so long and then I can stop using it, rather than, we can develop this into our daily lives. And so there's lots of things to consider there, I suppose, around the messaging and adoption of the behaviours.
So you were doing this project when you in Swansea University. Do you have some project going now in Lancaster?
So I've recently started at Lancaster University, so it's a shift from the sports science departments for me, but working in the Department of Health Research. So working on establishing some funding applications to set up, and I'd really like to establish a a focus around workplace sedentary behaviour, physical activity, obviously, because that's my area of interest. And there isn't one currently within the university. So there are working groups looking at occupational health and well-being and musculoskeletal conditions, but with a specific sedentary behaviour focus. I think that would be something that I'd like to do. So at the moment, it's very much a transition phase and looking to establish that. But in the meantime, I've got these projects that I'm still working on and trying to get published.
For most sedentary behaviour and physical activity researchers, collecting the research data is one of the most frustrating steps of a project, especially as inefficient data collection steals too much of your precious time, causes unnecessary stress and hassle, and can easily derail progress of your project. This is why we devised a revolutionary new way to collect data, introducing Fibion Sense Motion, the beginning of a new era. Fibion Sense Motion is a cutting-edge, next-generation system that allows you to easily and remotely collect, store, and manage data. Our solution features a tiny, waterproof device that captures the sedentary behaviour and physical activity data, a mobile app for automatic uploading of the data from the device, and a cloud service for managing the data. Even better, all collected data is GDPR compliant, and you have access to automatically analysed variables of activity types and raw 3-axis accelerometer data. Don't compromise on the quality of your research or the project timeframes. Discover the convenience and power behind our solution at sense.fibion.com. That is SENS.fibion.com. Fibion, created by researchers for researchers.
So you mentioned that you changed from sports science to health department. How has it been? How is it different? What have you noticed changing different departments?
It's a different program. So it's a taught PhD program, and there's different elements to it. There is sports science program that is happening at the university, but so I can see some ways that we can overlap and take from that. There's more of a psychology emphasis, looking around job stress and job strain, psychological safety. So I'm intrigued as to how I can kind of work and develop, and then work more collaboratively with other academics to build upon my expertise and their expertise and try to combine that into potentially holistic intervention programs within the workplace. Because I'm aware that physical activity, sedentary behaviour is one part of it. So it would be nice to develop and build upon those.
So you said that you are looking for funding and different possibilities. Is there some kind of collaborators you are looking for? There might be some who are listening this podcast episode. So if you have any wishes for collaborators, please tell it here.
Yeah. I mean, if anyone would like to get in touch, I would be really interested in discussing the idea of developing workplace intervention and evaluation. I have obviously experience within call and contact centres, but what I have noticed in some of the findings from my research is that we deliver kind of individual level strategies, so try to change behaviours from the individual and the employee perspective, but there's less in terms of policy level. So there's a lack of acknowledgement of physical activity and sedentary behaviour within working policies. So really looking at how we can develop practical strategies about how we can implement working policies as well to help shift behaviours from a top-down approach as well as a bottom-up approach, and meet somewhere in the middle to help try and shift working cultures. So that's a very broad answer, but if anyone is interested in collaborating, then I think that'll be great.
Yeah, hopefully some collaborators will get interested. I'm looking like here you have listed that you are using mixed methods researcher, and you say as a method ecological momentary assessment. I'm not familiar with this method. Could you tell more about it?
Yeah, so in the project at Swansea, so looking at the technology-based intervention and looking at the contextual factors. So ecological momentary assessment also is known as a sampling method, where we, rather than asking a individual to reflect on their behaviours pre and post, so looking at which often is affected by recall bias or recall error, we try to target in the moment assessments throughout the intervention as well, so we can track how people felt, whether they were able to break up their sitting time, where they were, what they were doing. So looking at kind of in the moment assessment rather than just purely relying on this reflection, which can often be it can have some kind of measurement of error there. So EMA, we looked, you can implement different frequencies of sampling frequencies. So our participants in this trial received a weekly questionnaire 6 times at random intervals during their working day to ask those types of questions. Were you able to break up your sitting time when you last received a prompt? If not, why not? What were you doing? Who were you with? And really being able to unpick those factors from that as well. So it's more kind of in the moment evaluation.
Yeah, and how do you see like the awareness of adverse health effects of sedentary behavior hasn't been along for that long time, and now people start to be aware of it, and we have good interventions that have found success changing people's behavior. How do you think the sedentary behavior will be in, let's say, 5 years, 10 years? Have we achieved big changes on a large level, or how do you think it will go in the future?
I mean, how I hope it will go and how it's forecast to go is quite different. So the trajectory is that actually, in addition to people becoming less active, there's a risk that people will become more sedentary. So the ways in which we work and commute and travel, technology has done vast amounts in terms of being able to make us efficient, effective, and productive, especially in the workplace. But it actually limits our opportunities and things to move our bodies and to be physically active and to break up our sedentary time. So there are estimates that the volume of the amount of time we spend sitting and sedentary each day is actually going to increase over the next 5 to 10 years. Particularly if we think about the COVID pandemic, for example, working from home, I see potentially that could have a negative impact on sedentary behaviour. When you see lots of people taking part in back-to-back Zoom meetings, in the workplace, that would involve actually standing up in between a meeting and moving from office to office. So actually taking a frequent break. But there's opportunities now to just sit in front of a screen throughout the whole day. So, technology is supporting that and rightly so, but it can have a negative impact on sedentary behaviour as well. So, I mean, I hope that there are enough strategies and awareness campaigns that we can look to reduce that and make people more aware. There's been a vast increase in the number of articles within the news, in the media and the news, raising awareness for the public health as well. So there is a general increase in awareness, I think. But how that pans out over the next few years will be, this is what we're here to do. We're trying to stop that from increasing, I suppose.
Yeah, I find it interesting that it's actually the predictions are showing that it will still increase, because I could feel that we already have all the technology to be extremely lazy in our life, and we don't need to do anything, that it would still go on. how do you see, like, for example, working from home and having a Zoom meeting? If you switch off the video, you can move much more freely during the call. There's no social norms that strong, especially if you have the video off. People don't really see what is your posture, what are you doing at the same time. Do you see it could also go other way, that it would be actually the technology would help us be less sedentary?
Yeah, I mean, potentially there are ways, and if you're working from home, you may not have the setup that you do in your office. So if you do have those access to sit-stand desks and different ways that you can actually break up your sitting time at work. But if you're working from home using a laptop, perhaps you could put it on a higher surface and conduct a Zoom meeting standing. There are no rules around whether you have to do it sitting or standing. I suppose, yeah, it could allow us to be a bit more flexible, but it depends on our working setups from home, which can be very varied and often actually enforce us to work in even poorer postures and working positions. So there may be a negative impact on muscular health after this, musculoskeletal health. I mean, again, we have access to thousands of videos that can teach us to, be more active from home as well. So it's been really positive to see some of those messages coming through, that people are really engaging in those, and the promotion of the daily physical activity as well, which is really important. So potentially there are ways that we can still be active during these times. Well, there's definitely ways we can still be active during these times, but it is difficult to try and integrate, especially when so many things have changed it so rapidly. So I think it's important to kind of be kind to ourselves, but also try and just maintain that awareness that actually we can do things for our longer term health as well, and hopefully, exceed these things beyond the pandemic.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so you have quite a lot of experience from interventions in the workplace. How do you see the intervention should be different when people are working from home? What are the main things that should be adapted from these workplace programs?
That's a good question, because essentially the message is still the same. The current recommendations are to reduce the total amount of time you spend sitting by 2 to 4 hours per day, and to frequently break up prolonged periods of sitting time, and try to increase light to moderate physical activity. So the message is still the same, whether you're working from home, whether you're working in the office. And I suppose it's just how we go about that is maybe slightly different. There's less opportunities to, when we say incidental activities like going to the printer or talking to your colleague and in breakout areas. I suppose it's just being mindful of the activities that we do while at home. But actually, like you said, if we can do some light resistance activities next to where we are doing our work, there's less social constraints, because there's not going to be anyone that you're maybe disrupting or maybe looking slightly strange in front of it in the workplace. So yeah, essentially the message is still the same, but it's just how we go about that at home. And for me, it's been difficult. So in some ways, I'm working from my kitchen, so me breaking up my sitting time shouldn't necessarily always involve me walking from my kitchen table to the fridge. So the snacking culture as well may not be beneficial in the long term, but short term, we just got to do what we got to do at the time.
Yeah, I think there's so many people working now on the kitchen table, and probably the kitchen chair is not the most comfortable and the most ergonomic chair in the world. So I think it might cause some musculoskeletal problems in the large scale. How do you see the situation? People in general, people working from home, what kind of problems do you expect to see from this really different situation in the world?
Well, it's unprecedented, isn't it? So, and these changes have happened so rapidly. My I suppose concerns are more about people's mental health and coping in that respect, there's been big movements, and I know from my institution, to try and maintain that social connectedness to others at work. So that's really important to do and to maintain. And yeah, it is just a very strange situation that we've all had to adapt to very, very quickly. And when we're talking about behaviour change interventions in the workplace, we're looking at changes happening gradually over time, 6 months, maybe 12 months. This has happened in an instant. So it's just doing the best we can with the information that we have, and what we have available to us in our home setups as well. So if you aren't sat on the best seats, then try to take even more frequent breaks to stretch and to move your body to try and prevent any kind of musculoskeletal problems as well. So
I fully agree. So we have now discussed about your PhD project and your project at Swansea University. Is there something you would like to add to these topics, or is there other topics you would like to bring into discussion?
I mean, I think that's what's occupying me at the moment in terms of that's my big drive to get these out and get these in press as soon as possible. So they're my big focus at the moment. But I think we've managed to cover a good amount.
Yeah, I do agree. Thank you for taking time for this podcast. It was really interesting discussions.
No, thank you very much for having me, Ellie.
Thanks for joining us this week on Physical Activity Researcher Podcast. If you like the show, make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing or following the show on Twitter. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. If you found value in the show, we would really appreciate a rating on Apple Podcast or whichever app you're using. Or if you would, in a real old school way, simply tell a friend about the show. It would be a great help for us. We have a fantastic lineup of guests for forthcoming episodes, so be sure to tune in. Thank you all for your support and have a great day.